So in this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you guys to the processing programming language. Processing started as like a digital sketchbook, so that'll kind of give you an idea of the capabilities or the things that you might use processing for. Processing provides a very simple programming interface to be able to create digital art work and create different kind of visual effects through programming. So here we are on processing.org. This is Processing's homepage, where you'll find links to references, tutorials, and examples, as well as different information and references regarding the processing programming language. The video tutorials I created are based off of the tutorials web link that's on here, because only the first one is a video tutorial and it's very short, just goes over the very basic things, and the rest of these are just textual tutorials. So I do use some of the information from these, and I encourage you to come here if there's anything further that interests you to take a look at the tutorials and further build off of the code that I provide. There's also examples here, so if you have something in mind that you wanted to achieve with the code, you can take a look at some of these examples and they'll provide you with some sample code as well to use. And the other very useful link here is the reference link. So these are all of the functions that are built into the processing programming language. And by clicking on any of them, it'll give you kind of a short example, like with the definition and the syntax, so that way you know what parameters it takes, as well as its return type. And processing is available for all platforms, Linux, Mac, Windows. The IDE, as well as the code you write itself, can create an executable for all of those platforms. And the IDE, which is the Integrated Development Environment, is also available for Android, so that you can use it on any Android tablet. You can actually write and run the code on there. And so that's what we're going to take a look at. So we've prepared our tablet by go ahead and downloading from the Play Store these apps. So we have some of the basic apps that you would normally see on the tablet, but we're primarily going to use the Android processing development environment. And then I also have here the processing reference link, so that way you can easily access all of those functions and have the definitions for the functions available through the processing programming language that I showed you on the URL. So in case you find it more convenient to use the app as opposed to going to Chrome, which we do have available on here, and going to that URL link, you have it accessible through there. So we'll take a look at that here in a second, and the text editor, we'll use that here shortly as well. And so just push that arrow to enter in to the reference. And you see it's the same structure and all of the same examples and information that was available to you at the URL. And the shapes that I'll show you in the tutorials are 2D primitive shapes, and so it's nice to have those definitions available to you. But there are 3D primitive shapes, so I encourage you to explore with that. Now we'll go back over to, or we'll go over here to the Android processing IDE. This is the integrated development environment. So here in the white section, this is where we'll put the code, or you would type any code that you would write. And I have some sample code that we're going to copy and paste over here to use. And then we'll go ahead and get our hands on with some of the buttons there at the top of the toolbar, which will run our code, undo any edits, and then that menu there off to the far right will allow us to save or open any code that we've previously worked on. Now, to get our hands on with those buttons and running our code, we're going to grab the sample code that I provided so we could copy and paste it over here. So to do that, we're going to want to jump over to Gmail. And you're going to see an email in the Gmail that you created with the subject line of Profile Tutorials Lesson Plan link. And so this is a shared Google Drive folder which has all the resources and links and everything that you need and available to you for this tutorial series. So you're going to open that email. And you're going to touch and long hold on the link. So we want to copy the link URL. And so then we'll jump over to Chrome and just paste that into the browser. And so now we have access to everything there. And this is the tutorial outline. So it gives you a brief description of everything I go over in each tutorial. And if I reference any URL links, the link to those references are available here on this outline. So we'll just go back. And now we're going to go over to the week 1 folder so that way we can access that sample code. And you'll see there for the tutorial 1, that is the sample code we want to access and put into our Android processing development environment. Okay, so we want to open that sample code. And we're going to click on that arrow at the top so that way we can download the file. Because we want to be able to, once the file's open, we can grab it off of our action bar there at the top and just tap on it to open it. And so that was why we had downloaded that text editor app to make it easier to be able to copy and paste the sample code. And so that's why we wanted to download it so that way we can view it through here. So now if we just double click on any word in the code, it'll highlight it, and there at the top on the toolbar we can tap on select all and then copy, and now we have it copied to our clipboard. So now we can go back over to the Android processing development environment and just tap and hold down on the white area, and that way we can push on paste, and that'll paste the code, the sample code that I provided. So really the main thing about the processing code for our first tutorial is that there's these two main functions, which is setup and draw. Setup runs only one time, the first time the program or the processing code is executed, and the draw runs on a loop, so it automatically reruns so that it can redraw. And this is so that if we have any animation or interactivity, the changes that we make will any changes that are made to the display screen will get updated in that draw function. So initially we're setting the width and the height just so that way we'll be able to reference a measurement. Is the display width and display height you will see are listed in the reference for the processing programming language. Those are built-in keywords, and so it uses Android to be able to reference the size of the Android screen display. So depending on what device they're viewing the program on, it will adjust accordingly, and we'll have those measurements saved under width and height variable. And then we're going to set up our background. So we'll color in our background, and we'll talk more about colors and changing that and coding different colors in a future tutorial. And right now I just wanted to show you how to run and execute the code in the IDE, and just get a feel for setting up the initial code, sample code, and getting everything over here. Okay, so we want to get a feel for using the IDE, and we want to run the code. Before we can do that, we do have to save the code. So we're going to save this file with your, I want you to save it with your first and last name. So we're going to go over here to the menu and go to Save Sketch. And so you do your first name and then underscore your last name. And this way when you submit them, we'll know whose everyone's profile is. Now we can push that play button at the top to go ahead and run the code, and we're tap on install. When this screen comes up, it'll happen every time you run the code and push that play button, as long as you don't have any errors, and then push open. And so this will allow you to view what your code does so far. So far we have this like light blue screen. So I just want to show you guys a couple of other things in case you run into any issues or anything, like with the code not compiling or not wanting to run. So we'll go back and get back to our code, and like for example, if you were missing a semicolon, if you add on to these things and this code that I provided you and end up forgetting to put in a semicolon somewhere, it'll let you know that bronze band will come up at the bottom, or now if it's some other error, might not tell you that it's a semicolon because it's going to be something else, but that bronze band will come up at the bottom, so that way you'll know that something is wrong, and obviously you won't see a result because it won't be able to run your code. So that way that lets you know at least you need to add back into that semicolon. Now another thing is that this background that I set up, like I said, we'll go over colors later on at a later tutorial, but just briefly, the RGB, that's the format for colors. So it's red, green, blue. And it's just like when you were in elementary school and you mixed so much red and so much green and so much blue together to make certain colors. So you saw earlier with the values that we had this kind of light blue color. So now we took away basically all the red, putting it down to 0. And what it is actually 0 is the blackest, the darkest, and 255 is the whitest. So the whitest shade of that, and 0 is the blackest shade of each of those colors for each value, red, green, and blue. And so now when we run this, we'll see that there's actually a different color. Again, install, open. A different color will appear. So we'll play a lot around with that more later on. Just a little bit about that for now. So now we'll get back to the code, and just want to show you where to get to your file if you need to open it. It's always under sketches, so that's the file that we saved. So when we build from here forward and add in any sample code, we'll be adding it to this file.